Welcome to American Police Stories, Real Crime Cases. Today, we're diving into one of the most chilling chapters in American criminal history. A tale that will make you question everything you think you know about the people around you. Imagine a suburban street in Chicago. Children laughing, neighbors chatting, and a jolly man dressed as a clown entertaining at birthday parties. Now, imagine that same street harboring one of America's most prolific serial killers. This is the story of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. The year is 1978. Behind the walls of a seemingly ordinary house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, a horror beyond imagination was about to be uncovered. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. March the 17th, 1942, Chicago, Illinois. A baby boy is born into what would appear to be an ordinary American family. But there was nothing ordinary about John Wayne Gacy's childhood. Under the roof of their Chicago home, young John lived in constant fear of his alcoholic father, a man who would regularly beat him, calling him a sissy and worthless. These emotional wounds would fester, creating a monster that would later terrorize an entire nation. Fast forward to the 1970s. Gacy had transformed himself into what seemed to be the perfect neighbor, a successful businessman, a political activist, a beloved community member who dressed up as Pogo the Clown to entertain sick children. But behind this carefully constructed facade lurked something infinitely more sinister. The crawl space beneath Gacy's house held a secret so horrific that it would shock even the most hardened investigators. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Picture this. You're a young man in Chicago looking for work. A successful local contractor offers you a job. He seems trustworthy. After all, he's well known in the community. He invites you to his house to discuss the position. The door closes behind you, and that's the last time anyone ever sees you alive. This was the fate that awaited at least 33 young men and boys who crossed paths with John Wayne Gacy, each one lured with the promise of work or shelter, only to face unimaginable horrors in his now infamous torture room. But how did law enforcement finally bring down one of America's most notorious killers? Let me take you to that fateful night of December 20th, 1978. After connecting Gacy to Robert Piest's disappearance, surveillance teams had been watching his every move for days. Detective Joe Kozenchak knew they were dealing with something sinister, but even he couldn't imagine the full scope of what they were about to uncover on that cold December night. With rain pelting the windows of their unmarked cars, police officers observed Gacy acting erratically. He was aware of the surveillance, playing a cat-and-mouse game with the officers, driving in circles and making sudden turns through Chicago's suburban streets. "He's heading home," crackled a voice over the police radio. "All units, stand by." The moment they'd been waiting for arrived at 2:30 a.m. when the search warrant was finally secured. Teams of officers, including the Des Plaines and Cook County Police Departments, moved into position around 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. As officers approached the house, the stench hit them, that inexplicable odor that neighbors had complained about for years. Gacy, surprisingly calm, answered the door in his bathrobe. "I've been expecting you," he said, with an unsettling smile. What followed was one of the most intense searches in American criminal history. While some officers kept Gacy under watch in his living room, others began the gruesome task of investigating the crawl space. The first officer to enter described the smell as death itself. Detective Sam Amarante recalls the moment everything changed. "One of our guys shouted from below. He'd found something in the soil, what looked like human remains. That's when Gacy's composed facade finally cracked. As officers placed him under arrest, Gacy reportedly said, "All the killing is over now. I want to clear the air." But even as they led him away in handcuffs, none of the officers knew they were dealing with what would become one of the largest mass murder cases in American history. During the next few days, the house on Somerdale Avenue became the center of one of the largest crime scene investigations Chicago had ever seen. Forensic teams worked around the clock, carefully excavating the crawl space. The bitter December cold didn't make their job any easier, as they had to bring in special heating equipment to thaw the frozen ground. News crews gathered outside as body after body was removed from the property. The neighborhood, once peaceful and quiet, became a circus of flashing police lights, news vans, and horrified onlookers. Many neighbors stood in shocked silence, trying to reconcile the friendly man they knew with the monster being revealed. In the interrogation room, Gacy finally began to talk. Over 12 hours of confession, he detailed his crimes with a coldness that chilled even the most seasoned detectives. He drew maps of where bodies were buried, described his methods, and showed no remorse for his actions. "The only thing they can get me for is running a cemetery without a license," Gacy joked during his confession, showing the true depth of his depravity. The investigation would continue for months, with law enforcement working tirelessly to identify every victim. Some families finally got answers about their missing loved ones, while others still wait for closure to this day. The capture of John Wayne Gacy wasn't just a victory for law enforcement. It was the end of a reign of terror that had gripped Chicago's suburbs for far too long. But for the families of his victims, it was only the beginning of their long journey toward justice. The trial that followed captured America's attention. Gacy's defense team attempted to paint him as insane, claiming multiple personality disorder, but the jury wasn't convinced. After just 2 hours of deliberation, they found him guilty of all 33 murders. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy faced his final moments. His last words, "Kiss my ass." Even in death, he showed no remorse, no recognition of the lives he had destroyed, the families he had shattered. But this isn't just about John Wayne Gacy. It's about Jeffrey Rignall, Robert Peast, Timothy McCoy, and 30 other young men and boys whose lives were cut tragically short. It's about the families who spent years wondering what happened to their loved ones. It's about a community forever changed by the knowledge that evil had lived among them. Wearing a clown's smile, the story of the killer clown forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they hide behind friendly smiles, charitable acts, and painted faces. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we invite into our communities, our homes, our lives. This has been Dark American Chronicles. Remember, behind every headline, there are real victims, real families, and real lessons we must never forget. What are your thoughts on John Wayne Gacy's story? Share your comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling true crime stories.